Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a Wednesday, and it's honestly provocative talk for the United States of America. And the breaking news within the last couple of hours, Chinese hackers have been attacking American infrastructure. Now, I hate using words like infrastructure. What they're going after is they are targeting critical infrastructure, although it's a word you almost can't get away from. What have they targeted? They have gone after the communications in the United States after manufacturing, utility, transportation, construction, maritime, government, information technology, and education, but most critically, communications. I mean, I want you to think about this for a moment. There is an outfit known as Volt Typhoon. Volt Typhoon is the name given to a Chinese-based operation. They call it a foreign actor. It is sponsored by the Chinese Communist government, in other words, Joe Biden's buddies in Beijing. And what Volt Typhoon tried to do, number one, they wanted to disrupt communications in between the United States and Asia. And why would China want to do that? Because most of us have been following what's going on with Taiwan and China and say China might want to try to attack Taiwan. They want to take back Taiwan. Not that they ever owned it to begin with, so maybe I shouldn't say take back, because what happened was Taiwan, and I have a bias there. I was born there. My mom and dad were in the U.S. Navy, but I happen to be made in Taiwan. Yeah, just like other things, laptop computers and things like that. But Taiwan is its own little country, and they are a very productive country, and they're a freedom-loving country. So China, which would like to seize control of Taiwan, they've already cut undersea communications cables between Taiwan and some of the other islands that are part of the nation of Taiwan, and I'll say nation of Taiwan. I mean, maybe 10 or 20 years from now, the Chinese communists will be able to try to silence anybody who mentions that Taiwan is its own country, which has stood up to the big bully of mainland communist China for literally decades. And I've talked about it on this show for decades. I remember about 20 years ago, China literally told Taiwan, if you elect so-and-so as the president of your freedom-loving, self-determining government country, if you do that, we will launch missiles at your island. I mean, in a lot of ways, it would be like this, although this would never happen. It would say, if Cuba chooses a particular leader as the head of a very sad little communist country, Cuba, if the United States were to say, if you choose that guy or that gal as the president of your country, why, America is going to bomb the daylights out of Havana. Now, can you imagine how the rest of the world would react and should react should the United States threaten Cuba? Either elect the person we want or we'll bomb the daylights out of you. We'll have the Marines at Guantanamo Bay come over the fence and attack your country. Why, the rest of the world would be outraged. And yet China does this to Taiwan on a regular basis. But, as I said, a lot of us expect that in the next few years, because of opportunities opened up by Joe Biden, because the Biden crime family is thoroughly compromised to mainland China, China's looking for ways to make sure that the United States does not get in its way when it comes to trying to take over Taiwan. So, late today comes the word from Microsoft, which says it, and here's a quote from their report late today, they have uncovered stealthy and targeted malicious activity focused on post-compromise credential access and network system discovery aimed at critical infrastructure in the United States. They know the name of the Chinese-sponsored actor. Now, here's where the critical question comes. What is Slow Joe going to do in response? I think a lot of us believe that Joe Biden is so thoroughly compromised to mainland China, he ain't going to say boo to Beijing. He's just not. And let me give you an example. America right now expects that this year, 2023, we will see well over 100,000 Americans die from fentanyl overdose. Now, they shouldn't be taking the drugs to begin with, but that's beside the point. Where are those drugs made? They are made, for the most part, in mainland China. And how do they get into America? China sends the fentanyl to Mexico. The Mexican cartels get it into the United States. And how does that happen? Because we have a president who is compromised to China. He'll brag all day long, and he does brag about this. He'll say, why, I talk to Chairman Xi on the phone all the time. Chairman Xi, of course, is the dictator who runs communist China. And we say, did you say anything to him about the fentanyl? No, he doesn't. Doesn't say a word about it. Now imagine this. A foreign country is shipping a dangerous and often deadly drug into your country. It is making a huge amount of money for criminal organizations both in China and in Mexico. And if you say, well, Lars, the Chinese Communist government, they can't control what goes on in their country, try to tell me that, and then I'm going to remind you that during the pandemic, China would literally shut down entire cities. They would tell people in their own country, you're not even allowed to leave your apartment building. We will weld the doors shut. And they did, to make sure you don't leave. They even told foreign nationals working in China at places like Apple Computer and Microsoft, you got caught at your office when we shut the city down, you stay there. You're not even allowed to walk out to the front of your house to pick up a delivery of groceries. Now, if a communist country is that tightly controlled that they can take those kinds of actions against their own people, do you think they would even hesitate to shut down fentanyl if they wanted to? They don't want to. And Joe isn't going to force them to do it. He's not going to demand that they do it. And as a result, over 100,000 Americans are going to die. So what a great way to disrupt a country like America than shipping dangerous, addictive, illegal drugs into the United States. When China does that, it is very much in China's interest to do it. And if China tries to take control of our communications infrastructure, you know what it's like. You have one of those days where all the computer servers at your company go down. And you say, when are they going to come back up? We don't know. Who took control of them? We don't know. What caused them to go down? We don't know that either. And you say, we're crippled without the ability to communicate. Yes, we are. And then when you see that this attack, identified by Microsoft, the news broke late today, an attack by Volt Typhoon, went after communications, manufacturing, utility companies. That's turning the lights out. That's the gas company, the electric company, and all those. Transportation, construction, maritime. And then you wonder, over the last few months, haven't we heard about some rather mysterious shutdowns of airline computer systems? And what happens when one of those systems goes down? It means airplanes don't take off. It means that NOTAMs, which is the notice to airmen that is used to identify and tell the pilots about possible threats on a plane, a commercial plane that's flying from A to B in the United States, when they can't send those messages, you cripple the entire transportation system of the United States. And if China takes that kind of control, I consider it an act of war. Joe Biden probably won't say anything about it. Back in a moment, we'll talk about Ron DeSantis announcing his bid for president tonight on Twitter. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Well, at long last, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has made his announcement that he's going to be running for president. We all expected it to happen. He's going to do some live things on Twitter tonight. But is that going to put a divide in the Republican Party? It won't for me. I'm still going to back Trump, and that's my dog in the fight. As Sarah Westwood joins me now, who's a Steamboat Institute Blankley Fellow and investigative reporter at the Washington Examiner. Sarah, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
What do you think this is going to do to the Republican Party? Because I don't know. I've been watching the polls. People know I tell my audience what my dog in the fight is. I'm backing Trump. I don't see any likelihood at all in the next year and a half that I'm going to change that position. It doesn't mean I don't like Governor DeSantis. It's just that I think Trump's the best candidate. And apparently, according to the polls, he's the odds-on favorite by a country mile to win the nomination, and perhaps a tighter race against bumbling, slow Joe Biden. But what's not to like about that? And if DeSantis isn't good, it'll bring more issues to the fore. But do I think he's going to get the nomination? It's a long time to next summer, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think what you just said, it's a long time to next summer, is the operative, words here. I mean, in 2016 or to 2015, I guess, when Donald Trump launched his campaign, he was way down in the same polls that people are looking at now, a way bigger deficit than Ron DeSantis has. I mean, Jeb Bush was leading the polls at this point, and a few months in, Ben Carson was then leading the polls. And so all that to say that the polls right now can do a good job of capturing where primary voters are at this very moment, but they don't do a very good job of predicting what's going to happen next year. So much could take place between now and then. And I will just say that even though Trump has been the champion of these sort of new right ideas, this new right populism that he brought to the forefront of the Republican Party, he's never had to defend that in this context in a primary against another Republican who claims to be able to do his job better, to do a better job of representing those ideas. This is really new territory for Donald Trump. Because he's only ever defended it against Democratic attacks, not from attacks within the party. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how DeSantis sort of navigates that, given that it is really uncharted territory.
I mean, Sarah, at the risk of disagreeing with you, but back when Trump was first running, I went to CPAC and I announced my endorsement of Trump then. I actually made the decision around Christmas of 15. But in the early part of 16, I said I'm going to announce it at CPAC for whatever that's worth. That and $2 will get you a cup of coffee. But I sensed from Reince Priebus and others, the party isn't too crazy about Trump, but we're just supposed to run a neutral contest, which I don't believe at all. But I saw Trump take apart, a dozen and a half other Republicans, and every time he did, the mainstream media would say, Trump's gone too far now. And they kept saying he was going to be destroyed. And, of course, the Democrat Party spent the whole of his time in office predicting his ultimate destruction, and it didn't happen. And then afterwards, they said, well, now we're going to destroy him. This will destroy him. Alvin up in New York, the fat prosecutor who's apparently worth a lot of money, he's going to destroy Trump. Well, that's not happening. Well, he's going to be charged in Georgia, and that's not happening. I mean, I keep hearing predictions of Donald Trump's, imminent demise, and they never seem to come true. But let me ask you about DeSantis, since this is his day. He gets his announcement. Is there a dime's worth of difference between the positions on the issues of Governor DeSantis and Donald Trump?
I think there is, actually, in some pretty important ways. And one of the most important ways is abortion. Donald Trump has not taken a stand on abortion yet. He has not outlined what his position is. He has not said what he would sign if he were president again. And that's a really important issue to a lot of Republicans, including the coalition of evangelicals and social conservatives that helped put Trump over the edge the first time. DeSantis has a pretty clear position on abortion because he just signed that 6-week ban into law in Florida. Now, it's an unpopular position with a lot of centrist voters. It's very popular, though, among Republican primary voters. And DeSantis has taken a bet that by defending that staunchly pro-life position, he can sort of run to the right of Donald Trump on abortion. Trump has not signaled an appetite to be that aggressively pro-life in office. And so, that's one way, and I think a really important one, where DeSantis is sort of setting himself apart from Trump. Trump has also been kind of critical of the way that DeSantis has gone after Disney. But I think a lot of Republican primary voters like to see someone in a position of power like DeSantis take on a corporation that has been totally captured by the institutional left. So there are some wedge issues that I think DeSantis can find in there that differentiates him from Trump and allows him to sort of run to the right of Trump.
See, now, Sarah, you're making it easy for me to be a little bit of a contrarian. I don't entirely disagree with you, but well, and that's kind of fun because usually I just agree. I mean, I end up agreeing with people in your position. Do you think, if I made this statement, you tell me if it's true or not, Donald Trump, at the time he was president, was the most pro-life president America had seen in modern history? Is that true?
I would say yes. Yes, with an asterisk next to it.
Okay.
In that Roe v.
Which
Wade
is?
was still the law of the land. So there wasn't a lot that Trump could do other than appoint
hold on.
judges.
Did Donald Trump's nominations to the Supreme Court make any difference to Roe v. Wade?
No, they certainly did. They certainly did. But I don't know that any other Republican president would have done differently what he did. But now that Roe v. Wade has been struck down, and thanks to, as you point out, Donald Trump's efforts in choosing pro-life justices for the bench, he has sort of a responsibility to stake a position on abortion in terms of whether that's the limit that he would want Congress to pass, if he wants Congress to stay out of it, leave it up to the states.
No, but Sarah, this is where you make the mistake. The Supreme Court said this is a decision for the states, and it is. Now, I know there are people like Lindsey Graham who did that catastrophic move to have a federal stance on abortion. No, they said it's not in the Constitution. This is not the federal government's job. Let the states decide it. And that, to me, is the sensible position, saying now that the Supreme Court has said the federal government doesn't have a role in deciding abortion for the whole country, which I know the Democrats would like, Donald Trump should stake out a position to re-seize federal control of abortion. No, leave it with the states where it belongs.
What the Supreme Court essentially said was that Roe v. Wade was improperly decided in that the court set an arbitrary line where voters should have the opportunity to do that via their elected representatives. So whether that's at the state level or whether that's at the federal level, what the Supreme Court said is that it's up to voters. So I don't know that asking Congress to impose a standard necessarily violates what the Supreme Court said in Dobbs. But again, Donald Trump hasn't outlined what he wants to do. Would he sign the Lindsey Graham 15-week abortion bill? Would he back states being able to enact restrictions as strict as DeSantis's or as permissive as Oregon's? It's just unclear at this moment. And just going back to my first point, I think the sort of interesting new challenge in this primary will be Trump having pressure from a fellow populist Republican in the context of a primary to have to take positions on those, whereas when he was the only candidate in the race and he's had the field to himself, he really hasn't faced that much pressure to pick a lane.
And by the way, Sarah, on the Disney thing, I think that's a stupid direction that DeSantis went. I hate what Disney did, too. I used to take my granddaughter there. I live 1,000 miles away from the one Disney and 3,000 away from the other one. We took her there half a dozen times, and she's only 7 years old. We do not take her to the Mouse House anymore. The Mouse House is full of perverts, unfortunately. But having said that, would any real conservative back Ron DeSantis' push to have the government, whether it's the government of Florida or the federal government, tell Disney what to do? I'll give you the last 20 seconds.
It depends on what you mean by conservative. An old Chamber of Commerce, Bush-type conservative? No, they wouldn't like that. I think the new right conservatives want to see pushback against these corporations that are totally beholden to a militant left. And so I think there are a lot of conservatives of this new type that applaud what DeSantis did.
I get that, but I'll tell you what, I'd rather see the pushback that Bud Light got, which was entirely from the American people, than the pushback of government trying to define what private companies do. That's Sarah Westwood from the Washington Examiner and the Steamboat Institute. Thank you, Sarah. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I'm glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com, and count on this. If you happen to be a naysayer, that is somebody who calls the show and disagrees with my point of view, I'm happy to put you right to the head of the line. at 866-HEY-LARS. You can also send those emails to talk@LarsLarson.com. Our Twitter poll can be found at Lars Larson Show and at LarsLarson.com, two places. I know some of you aren't crazy about Twitter. I kind of like the way the place has been reformed, and we have our blue check mark, and yes, we are paying for it. Should the U.S. government borrow more money without cuts in spending? I would say no to that. No, they shouldn't. And guess what? CNN, our friends at the Chicken Noodle News Network, did a poll of Americans. And do you know what they found out? 60% of Americans polled say the debt ceiling increase should come only with some spending cuts. Wow. That means that's not just Republicans. It's not just Democrats. It's likely some independents as well. And the fact is, a tiny number of people said, no, go ahead and give them the debt ceiling increase without cuts. That was about 24%. So that was probably mostly Democrats who said, oh, no, Joe should be able to borrow all the money he wants to do. And he should be able to do it without the Congress because of the 14th Amendment, that crazy argument. But should the U.S. government cut its spending before it gets more borrowing? And I think 60% of Americans are very sensible. Now, will the Congress actually pay attention to them? We're told that by June 1, that's the hard deadline to avoid economic catastrophe. And I've had more than a few people say, oh, this is all a bunch of baloney. They'll be able to pay the bills. No, actually, they might go into default. I guess it has actually happened. Technical default has occurred at least 4 times in American history. But full-on default, where the United States government, which owes a lot of money on our behalf, so we owe the money, has simply not paid the bill on time. That full default could happen this year. And I would put most of it in Joe Biden's lap, although he's already said on camera that he bears no share of the blame at all for this happening. The fact that he stalled and refused to negotiate for more than 100 days while the Republicans were begging him to negotiate, I guess that goes by the wayside. Joe Biden just figures he doesn't have to negotiate. He just delivers edicts the way Barack Obama used to do. He signs his name to a piece of paper, and you have to do it. No, you don't. The American presidency is a great office in a great country, and it was created by the Constitution, which gave the American executive, the president, very little power at all. He can't spend money without Congress's say-so. He can't raise taxes without Congress's say-so, and he can't borrow money without Congress's say-so. So should they borrow more without cuts in spending? No, absolutely not. Twitter poll can be found at Lars Larson Show, and always brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group years ago. You should too. Just go to amac.us, or you can make the phone call, 888-262-2006. AMAC is better for you and better for America. I want to suggest something, and I want to use the words of Jonathan Turley, who, while he is a liberal Democrat, is actually a very smart guy, and he seems to be very sensible. He doesn't just hew to his politics. He actually tells you what he thinks the law says. But Donald Trump may end up with a legal defense that is built out of the fact that Joe Biden's Department of Justice has refused to prosecute one of its own. Now, the Department of Justice's special counsel, Jack Smith, is continuing his work toward possible criminal charges against President Donald Trump. Now, Turley writes it this way, but a recent decision by the Department of Justice may complicate that final decision about Trump over a double standard. Now, the DOJ is well aware they have standards for how you charge people with crimes and when. One of those standards is you never indict a sitting president. I suppose you could have extraordinary circumstances in which a sitting president would be charged with a crime. It's not likely to happen. As Turley points out, last week, the Justice Department announced it would not charge Rachel Rollins, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts, despite a referral from the DOJ's Office of the Inspector General that found evidence she lied to investigators and may have improperly sought to influence an election. So, in other words, the Justice Department's own IG has determined she committed a crime. same kind of crime they went after General Mike Flynn about, lying to investigators, and that she may have tried to improperly influence an election. As Turley points out, Rollins resigned from the office on Friday, and the officer of the Inspector General released detailed findings against Rollins for allegedly trying to influence a Suffolk County District Attorney election last year. She was also accused by the Inspector General of lying under oath during an investigation into the matter. She should be in trouble. She was trying to help out Boston City Councilman Richard Arroyo in the Democrat primary for Suffolk's district attorney by providing derogatory information to the Boston Globe and Boston Herald regarding his opponent, then interim DA Kevin Hayden. The IG said the information included non-public, sensitive DOJ material that Rollins acquired as a result of her federal position. So she did what Comey did. She did what Biden did. She did what Hillary Clinton did. She was using the government to try to influence an election. Now, we should take this very seriously, folks, because at this point, we're not getting the kind of results we should get when public officials use their positions to try to turn an election and deny you and me, the American voters, the right to make that decision. The investigation found an array of other violations, including disregarding ethical warnings on political activities, and even, get this is cheesy, soliciting expensive sports tickets. And what Turley says is the Rollins case could be raised by Donald Trump's team of lawyers with other declined criminal cases as evidence of selective prosecution if Trump is indicted. I think that's absolutely right. And she should have been prosecuted. And if she's not going to be prosecuted, how in the world can you justify prosecuting Trump? Go to Greg, who's a naysayer from Ohio. Hey, Greg, welcome to the program. You know we love naysayers. What do you and I disagree about?
Well, it's not, I just was wondering, I guess, about the possibility of why they wouldn't just let this debt ceiling thing go through. They've done it so many times in the past, just like clean, let it go through. There's been so many other monies thrown around into Ukraine, all over the place, that it seems like making cuts right now, to the people here, it might just be the wrong time.
Well, no, hold on. When you're spending more money than you take in, when you've created massive inflation and an economy that could slide into recession, wouldn't that be exactly the time you'd want the government to cut back on its spending?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, because the spending is already done. I mean, I guess
no, it's not already done, Greg.
Making a plan to cut spending in the future.
Greg,
but
no,
as of
Greg.
Right now, with everything that's been
Greg,
going on, it seems
hey,
like.
Greg, they shoveled out hundreds of billions of dollars for a COVID emergency that was over a year ago. Some of that money has not been spent. One of the things the Republicans are asking for is, could you take all the money we gave you for the emergency that you didn't spend and the emergency is over, send the money back to the Treasury, we're going to take care of it that way. That money has not been spent. That's still a decision that could be done, and the Democrats want to keep that money out there, and the Republicans are saying, send it back. Coming up, we're going to talk about a state of emergency in one of the Commonwealth's, Virginia in this case. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Wednesday. Always glad to take your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. We love to talk to our friend Joe Thomas, program director at our affiliate in Charlottesville, Virginia, and host of Joe Thomas in the Morning and Freedom and Prosperity Radio, WCHV, and, of course, Joe's podcast as well. Joe, welcome back to the program, by the way.
Hey, Lars, how are you doing this beautiful day? I hope it's beautiful as it is here where you are.
Yeah, you're on the right coast. I'm on the left coast. I'm surrounded by liberal pagans, and it's fine because this is where they need me the most. But let me ask you about this. Roy Cooper, all right? So Governor Roy Cooper and North Carolina, they have he's declared a state of emergency because what? Because parents are able to make a decision about whether or not to send their kids to public school or take them somewhere else. And the people's representatives in North Carolina have said, and when you take your kids to that other school, you get a chance to take some of the public money with it and cause your kids to be educated. What's not to like?
Well, we gave Roy Cooper the Terry Award yesterday on my show. The Terry Award is named after the late, great Terry McAuliffe, who committed political suicide on the altar of the teachers' unions. Because I said this, we were talking with some of the folks from Milton Friedman's wonderful organization, Ed Choice, and I said, Terry McAuliffe's not a dumb person, and I don't believe Roy Cooper is either, but they're so slaved to the teachers' unions that anything that smacks of school choice has got to be opposed. And Cooper has just taken it to the nth degree. And I found out that 80% of the United States right now has school choice legislation making its way through their local general assembly and are on their way to, hopefully, to their governors. Now, we're a little jealous here in Virginia because our general assembly is split. The Democrats in the Virginia Senate blocked our education success accounts from going to Governor Youngkin. So we're trying to work out a trade, our state Senate for their governor, and then they can be happy, and then we can get school choice legislation to Governor Youngkin, who has promised to sign it. I mean, this is as common sense as it is, and all of the demagoguery that Roy Cooper has thrown out about this, it's going to slash teacher salaries, it's going to lead to millionaires getting tax cuts. The 70s are on the phone looking for their campaign rhetoric back, and it's patently not true. The budget that both houses in the North Carolina General Assembly passed includes 7% pay raises for public school teachers. So he isn't even right with the actual budgets that are making its way to his desk.
I guess the thing this is the one that hits me, Joe, and maybe I'm too obscure, but tell me what you think of this. If I were to say to you, Joe, I have a restaurant in Charlottesville, and the only way I can make sure that I have customers in my restaurant is if no other restaurant is allowed to operate in Charlottesville. How have I just indicted my own business? By saying the only way I can get people to eat here is if they have no other choice. That's what Roy Cooper has said about this. The only way we can keep kids in school is if we tell them there's no other place you're allowed to go. Well, hold on, doesn't that? And then I'm sure he says, oh, but we have fine schools. Fine schools that can only keep classrooms full if you make the kids go there?
Yep. That's right. And subsidies work very well, don't they, Lars? We all know that. And then today, Governor Cooper goes to an inner city Charlotte school, that Charlotte school is suffering so badly. The school drop off from the mask mandates and the COVID-19 lockdowns, that their grades have dropped 10%. But he goes there to tout how much better things will be once he's managed to get rid of these Republicans who are threatening to give millionaires tax cuts and allow these millionaires to use taxpayer money to send their kids to private schools, as if millionaires weren't already sending kids to private schools. Oh, and by the way, do you know where Roy Cooper's kids go?
Private school, don't they?
No more calls. We have a Cupid doll winner in Lars Larson. That's
exactly.
Right.
And Joe, this is such, and here's the other thing. You and I both know, we've laughed about the fact that, the mainstream media loves to say, X is going to happen, women and minorities to suffer the most, right? It's an old Washington Post joke because you say, hold on, don't tell me it's women and children, or poor and minorities are going to suffer the most. But in this case, it is literally the truth that it is poor families that will be hurt by Cooper's intransigence on school choice the most, because even middle-class families who say, we're willing to make sacrifices, no vacations, no boat for dad, no, whatever mom's hobby is, we're going to spend the money putting our kids in private school. They can do it. Rich people can do it. The poor people and racial minorities among them are the ones who are going to suffer the most from not having school choice. Then you're forced to go to the low-rent, non-performing, and I hate to say it, because I know the school teachers think I'm attacking them. No, I'm attacking the institution of your schools that routinely fails kids. How about giving kids a choice? Because it should actually improve the public schools, shouldn't it?
Oh, and it does. where it's been enacted, even teacher salaries go up, teacher opportunities go up, teachers can move out of the public schools and into either private operations. They can hang out their own shingles. They can work with homeschool co-ops. So many more opportunities for teachers to do what they are gifted to do, which is go into a classroom full of uninterested 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds and excite them about whatever the subject matter is. That is a gift that is beyond me anyway, Lars. So when they demagogue the fact that teachers are going to suffer, I go back to the biggest hero for school choice, and Roy Cooper should check this. The biggest advocate for school choice was Barack H. Obama.
Yep.
When in his second term, he was about to cut the D.C. scholarship program.
Yep.
When his 2 daughters came to him, and he told the story from behind the lectern, so it must have been on his teleprompter, that his daughters begged him not to do it because all of their friends would have to leave school. So if you believe the story, that means all these poor kids in Washington, D.C. were able to go to school with the daughters of the President of the United States. And if there's not a bigger sales pitch for school choice, I don't know what is.
And by the way, along with that, Joe, you know that in D.C., an awful lot of poor people live in the district. And when they offer that scholarship, an awful lot of less than middle class families said, well, if you're going to put up, I think, $2,000 or $3,000, we'll get the rest of it. What do you get when you have parents who are actually paying part, a few $1,000 a year? Mom and dad say, hey, listen, Sonny, we're paying for that schooling you're getting. You will go to school. You'll pay attention to the teacher. You'll do your homework. You get much more engaged parents when the parents actually have skin in the game than when you have parents saying, well, it's free. Well, we all know what the usual value of anything you're given for free is, and it ain't great. That's Joe Thomas. You hear him in the morning on WCHV, our great affiliate in Charlottesville, Virginia. You also hear him on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, and you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I feel like I've died and gone to heaven. I've got a naysayer waiting for me, and if you listen to the show, you know that I love naysayers, especially if they can hold their own. Welcome to the Lars Larson Show. If you want to jump into the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. A shout out to our friends in New Haven, Connecticut, where they listen to great talk radio all day on WMMW. That's AM 1470. And you can find my show there as well. Our Twitter poll, and this fits right in with my naysayer, should the U.S. government borrow more money without cuts in spending? That is the central issue when it comes to this debt ceiling debate, in which Joe Biden has spent more than 100 days sitting in the White House refusing to negotiate, while the Republicans have asked him over and over and over again, will you please sit down at the table? Let's come to agreement. We can extend the debt ceiling, but we're not doing it unless you cut spending. And guess what? The Chicken Noodle News Network, CNN, has a poll. They did the poll, so you can't exactly blame it on conservatives. There isn't a conservative within a country mile of CNN. 60% of those in the poll say the debt ceiling increase should only come with spending cuts. 60%. Only a tiny 24% said that Joe Biden should get more authority to borrow money, or the Congress should allow the debt ceiling increase without spending cuts. 24 to 60, I'd say that's a landslide. So the question to answer, should the U.S. government borrow more without cuts in spending? I'd say no. You can answer any way you like. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group, and you should too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC's better. Better for you and better for America. Mark the naysayer. Mark, welcome to the program. We love naysayers. Where do you and I disagree today?
I disagree because earlier in your program you stated that the executive branch, meaning the president, does not have the authorization to spend money without Congress. However, I look back to where did all those pallets of money go to Iran? Congress wasn't involved in that.
It was money, and I will tell you, Mark, it was monies. And I don't know that I've looked over the years. I know what you're talking about, the pallets of money that Barack Obama sent to the mad mullahs in Tehran. And they took money that had been allocated by the United States Congress at some point, and they found a way to use it differently. But without congressional approval, can you find anything in the Constitution that says a president can spend money or borrow money without the approval of Congress?
There is none. However, I will say this. Where's all the millions of dollars going to the Ukraine war? I haven't seen anything.
Congress has acted on that. I didn't like it. Congress voted on it. Now, Congress votes on a lot of things without having a debate, and I don't like that either. But when you say, was the money or has the money that's been sent to Ukraine been approved by the U.S. Congress? It has. I don't like it, but there it is.
What about the $8 billion that have just recently been authorized, apparently by whom, to go to Afghanistan?
The only way that money gets authorized to be spent is by the U.S. Congress. Now, I will tell you this, Mark. No, hold on, Mark. Would you let me finish? When Donald Trump became president, he asked the Congress, and Paul Ryan, the so-called Republican, sold him out, but he said, pass a bill and give me the funding to build the wall. And Congress wouldn't do it under Ryan. And, of course, they didn't do it under the Democrats. So he found monies that were already allocated for national security. They'd already been authorized by Congress, and he said, we're going to spend that money on the wall. And the lawyers looked at it. There were a lot of people who said, no, it's not legal for him to do it. Well, if you don't think it's legal, take it to court. And I'll tell you why. Because, Mark, when Joe Biden said, I'm going to force everybody in America to take the jab, or I'm going to force all employed people to take the jab. And he tried to use the authority of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and he got taken to court, and the court shot him down. So it is possible for a president to take monies that have already been authorized and spend them not exactly the way the Congress authorized. And if you're wrong about that, the courts will stop you. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but again, who authorized?
The Congress.
I know that, but who authorized? So to begin with this war in Ukraine, Joe Biden said, "No, we're not sending tanks."
I know, and well, but hold on. If you're going to ask me to explain the lies of Joe Biden, I don't have a radio show long enough for that.
But I haven't seen it debated on the floor of Congress.
Well, there are a lot of things that the Congress does, Mark, that do not get debated. They put them up for a vote and they vote them through. They do a lot of stuff, a lot of routine stuff that way. And the fact is, I'm in the minority when I say I don't think we should be funding that war in Ukraine. Let's go to Terry. Hey, Terry, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
I think it's Jerry. Am I on
Jerry.
now?
Yeah, Jerry, go ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, this is certainly about money, but maybe you can explain, and I think I'm probably a naysayer to maybe half the people in the country, but I continuously hear this quote, and it is, the government just prints more money, end
Yep.
of quote. And
Yep.
I don't believe that. That doesn't, or maybe I'm just too literal, but what does that actually mean?
Can I tell you? I'll
What
tell you
actually
what it
happened?
means. I'll tell you what it means, Jerry.
Okay.
When the Congress
Please, sir.
authorizes borrowing, the way that you and I borrow, I just had to get a new car loan, right? Not for a new car, but for an old car. But I wanted to refinance it. So I went to my credit union, and I didn't physically go there. I sent them a note, and I sent them all my pay stubs and all that stuff. And I said, I need a car loan. And they approved it. That's how you and I borrow money. The way that big companies borrow money is they write commercial paper, I think is the phrase they use. The way the U.S. government borrows money, it issues treasury bills. And when they say, we're going to take this treasury bill, billions of dollars worth of treasury bills, and they offer them to the marketplace. Now, the way somebody buys them, it could be a 401k, and often is, could be a bank like Silicon Valley Bank, could be an IRA, could be an individual. Individuals buy treasury bills as well. And so how do they get the money? They issue a treasury bill, which purports to be money, and say it's worth $1 billion. And they offer it, they're not that big, but say it's $1 billion. They then have somebody, a big investment company, say, we'll buy your treasury bill for $1 billion. Treasury, the financial company transfers the money, and it effectively manufactures money, because what the Treasury has done is issued a debt instrument that allows them to borrow money. It's about as simple or as complicated as that is. Back in a moment. If you've heard the mainstream media and BLM, you'd think Black Americans are the victims of police brutality. We'll talk about the truth of that coming up next. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. If you took the time and wasted your time by listening to the mainstream media and BLM activists, you'd probably come to the conclusion that Black Americans are often the victims of police brutality at a rate much higher than any other racial demographic in the United States. Well, let's talk about the actual facts. And to do that, Christopher Ferguson joins me now, who's a professor of psychology at Stetson University in Florida and author of Catastrophe, with an exclamation point, The Psychology of Why Good People Make Bad Situations Worse. Professor, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
So tell me about this. When you actually look at the data on policing and race, would anybody who actually looks at the real numbers draw the conclusion that Black Americans are treated disproportionately in a bad fashion compared to other racial groups in America?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, so, the data, of course, is a little bit complicated, but what's happening is that, particularly in the last several years, there's been this narrative that police shootings of unarmed Black men are really, really common, and that they're motivated by racism and such. And if you actually look at the data very clearly, police shootings of unarmed individuals of any race are actually quite rare. So it's important that people understand that. And more white men are shot than are Black men. There actually are very, very few Asian men who are shot, but most people don't talk about Asian men. And even though there are some proportional differences, Black individuals are shot more often proportionally, given their numbers in the population.
Right.
That actually matches proportional differences in violent crime as well. So it seems to be explained by contact with police more than it is, which is to say zero, really, anything like systemic racism or something like that. So I think people have really gotten kind of a lot of misinformation on this issue. And I think that's causing more harm than good at this point.
I think you're right. And Professor, I used to be a reporter. I think reporters are being lazy. And I tried not to be a lazy reporter, but there are reporters who don't pay attention to the numbers and say, wow, we have, 6.5% of the U.S. population is Black men and 6.5% is Black women. And yet Black men account for about 50% of American homicides, and about 90% of their victims are Black Americans. And you say, well, if they're 6.5% of the population, they should be 6.5% of the murders. No, not necessarily, any more than men are 90% of the violent criminals in society, and women are only 10. Does that mean the system's biased against men and in favor of women? I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think it's important to point out that a lot of what is happening with police shootings or police violence or whatever we're kind of focused in on here is not so much about race, and even if you look at like perpetration of crime, as we say, there are ethnic differences. Actually, Asian American men commit the fewest crimes compared to other groups. Again, people don't tend to point to that very much. But really it comes down to, issues of like class and poverty and, a lot of that kind of stuff. So the experiencing of like a very poor white man is very similar to a very poor black man in terms of both whether they're going to commit crimes or if they're going to experience, a negative interaction, or violence with police and that sort of stuff. So we really should be focusing on class issues, mental health, and some of the research that we've done at Stetson University. We tend to find, for instance, race doesn't really predict police misconduct, but mental health in the community does. What's probably happening with a lot of these cases is that police, tend to go in and escalate a situation because they want people to comply, and they end up with a suspect who has a mental illness and who really can't comply with police requests, and that situation escalates out of control. So we really should spend a lot more time thinking about mental health, what we're doing with mental health in society, how police officers are trained to deal with mental health. But unfortunately, we've kind of distracted ourselves with this sort of self-gratifying focus in on race, which, for some reason neglects, as you pointed out, the increase in homicides in low-income neighborhoods, which is disproportionately affecting the Black community. And for some reason, that doesn't get as much news attention as the idea of like defunding the police or something of that sort.
I guess when you mention the training of police, the only pushback I'd make is if a cop shows up to a report of somebody who's causing a problem, that's generally why the police get called. It's why they show up. When they show up, they may or may not, in many cases may not, know the background of the individual. They may not know he's got a criminal record, may not know he's got a mental health record. And even if they did, if you had, Jung and all the other famous psychologists of all time show up at this event, would they necessarily be able to get the crazy man under control? My suspicion is, I don't care how well trained they are, you can't. So do the police have any choice but to say, when we show up and somebody's doing something wrong, hitting people, shooting people, threatening people with a knife, you stop them from doing that, period. And where does the mental health training come in, or where could it actually be useful?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. And, having worked with, psychiatric populations and criminal justice populations, I can say as a psychologist, people oftentimes look at us and say, where's your magic wand to wave and calm this person down? And the reality is that it doesn't work like that. We don't have anything of that sort, But, I think in some situations, I absolutely agree with you. If someone's got a knife, someone's got a gun, and they're waving it at someone or they're threatening to stab someone or shoot someone, then a police officer isn't going to have that time to, try to assess the situation and, talk calmly necessarily. I think in some situations, and some of the ones that have escalated, oftentimes the initial approach is something fairly minor. And then it escalates from there. And it may be possible in some of those situations that the officer knows, like, hey, this person's, committing a misdemeanor, it's nonviolent, and they seem to, really be out of their mind, essentially. Maybe I could take a little bit of time, I could talk calmly to this person, and it may go in a different, direction. So there has been some research on things like that, like police training with mental health, and, it suggests it really can be good. And it can decrease, bad contacts with the, suspects. So, so I think it is useful and something we really should be focused in on. But like I said, I mean, what we've done the last, certainly last 3 years, and I'd say even extend that out to 10 years possibly, has in many ways, I think, detracted from that, and we've lost focus on that sort of stuff as we're sort of, renegotiating our history and thinking of these ideas of like white supremacy and all this kind of stuff going on in the U.S. And I think it's really taken us away from a focus in on things that actually can work. And, the reality is if you want good cops and you want good, well-trained cops, that's going to require us to have more funding for police, So this whole idea of defunding the police, I remember that like hitting the news in 2020, and I thought I was on a different planet because obviously this is going to be a disaster. There's like clearly this is, there's no evidence to suggest that this is wise. Homicide rates were through the roof throughout history. I mean, the thing that made modern societies possible was a functioning modern police force, which we've only really had for the last not even quite 200 years. So you don't want to get rid of that. I mean, it doesn't mean that there may not be some things we want to fix, absolutely. But in terms of like, getting rid of it, getting rid of prisons and all kinds of other stuff, that was an obvious recipe for disaster. And I sort of lost some faith in people's critical thinking a little bit there.
Last issue, Professor, I want to ask you about. Tell me what you think of this, because this has always been my suggestion. Change the civil commitment laws. Because right now, if Christopher Ferguson, professor at Stetson, goes down and starts acting like a lunatic, they can only take you in and contain you if you are a danger to yourself or others. And the minute you're not, you may still be kind of crazy, but the minute you're not a danger to yourself or others, they cut you loose again. And if you ask the treatment people, you say, is Chris going to go crazy again the minute he's not in this facility and not, on drugs? And yeah, he's going to go crazy again. So we're just going to loop him through the cycle until either he goes too far and gets shot or hurts somebody and goes to jail, or we're just going to let him loop through the cycle indefinitely. That seems crazy. You get the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And there's probably a lot of people who would love to commit me, by the way. But, just a case this week in New York, the last couple of weeks in New York City, with the gentleman was killed on a subway because he was, having a mental health crisis. He was out of control. A citizen ended up, putting him in a chokehold. That was very tragic. But I absolutely agree. What we're lacking in society is some kind of long-term care option for individuals who are chronically mentally ill, who
That makes perfect sense. Christopher Ferguson, professor at Stetson University. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I understand, and if you share my opinion, that an awful lot of college professors have gone absolutely bug house crazy. And I'll give you a great example of that in just a moment. A woman professor who actually pulled a machete on somebody just because she disagreed with the man. So we'll get to that in just a moment. First, welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Wednesday. Always glad to get your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you're a naysayer, we put you right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com and vote in our Twitter poll. Here's the question, very simple. Should the U.S. government borrow more money without cuts in spending? My answer to that would be no, they should not borrow more money without cuts in spending. And CNN, amazing as it is, CNN had a poll that said 60% of Americans say the debt ceiling increase should only come with spending cuts. Now, when I hear a number like that, and I understand that America is about 40% liberal and Democrat, 40% Republican and conservative. Not all Republicans are conservatives, and not all conservatives are Republicans. And then you got about 20% non-affiliated or so. That's the way it breaks out. So when you hear 60%, even if you assumed that every single conservative and Republican said, you're right, no ceiling, no debt ceiling increase without spending cuts, that would still leave you about 20 points short. And not every Republican feels that way. So that means you have to have almost all the Republicans and some independents or non-affiliated voters and some Democrats. When Joe Biden is looking at a 60% America that says, don't you dare increase the amount of borrowing that the U.S. government does unless you cut spending. And then the rest of the poll, only 25% of those in the CNN poll said, go ahead and raise the debt ceiling, give the government a bigger credit card on our dime. Only 25% said, go ahead and do that. 25%. Joe Biden is on the wrong side of history as usual. It's like, what was it? Obama said, never underestimate Joe's ability to blank things up. Yep, exactly right. And coming from the horse's mouth. So 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And the Twitter poll is brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I join. You should too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. Now, in yesterday's Twitter poll, I ask you this. Should America's Air Force host an all-ages drag show for military families. I said no. So did 95% of you. Only 5% of you thought it was right that Nellis Air Force Base, that's the one right outside of Las Vegas, was hosting an all-ages drag show with children in the audience. I cannot imagine. I'd love to hear from the naysayer who'd give me the sensible argument why that is a good idea. And by the way, I'm sorry to report North Face has now gone full drag queen. I always thought they made great coats and outdoor gear. In a brand new ad with clothing and apparel targeted to adults and kids, the clothing company North Face has a man in drag with a full mustache and a mini dress promoting pride and telling viewers to come out. Well, I'll tell you what, North Face, get out. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is reportedly planning on housing as many as 1,500 illegal aliens in dormitories at 3 state college campuses across the state. What could possibly go wrong? A bunch of illegal alien criminals on a campus with your sons and daughters? Yeah, you can imagine how that might work out. The South Carolina Senate has now voted by about a 2-to-1 margin to send a 6-week abortion ban to the desk of Governor Henry McMaster, Republican. I'm reasonably sure that Governor McMaster will sign that. And I hated to see the news today, although we knew it was probably coming. Tina Turner, the wild-haired rock goddess who sold out stadiums, earned a dozen Grammy Awards, and won the adoration of fans around the world. A music career of 5 decades. She died today, Tina Turner, dead at the age of 83. Oh, and then consider this, what's going on in Chicago. A shocking new video that shows illegal alien camps that are taking over a Chicago police precinct. Videographer Rebecca Brannon says, I'm told that just about every police station in the city is like this. They say that one police station has more than 100 illegal aliens there. And again, what could possibly go wrong? You want the police to go out and address crime, and then you load them up with a bunch of people who are criminals to camp out at the police station? Seems like a terrible idea. And a shout out to our friends in Buffalo, New York. You listen to great talk radio in Buffalo on WHLD. That's AM 1450. And of course, you can find my show there as well. And we do get some interesting emails from time to time. There was one that I wanted to put in front of you. I guess I'll have to do that just a little bit later. Oh, a couple of other things. Representative Anna Paulina Luna has introduced a resolution to fine Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff $16 million for his claims. Remember when he said, I've got proof positive right here. He didn't have anything. $16 million for his claims that former President Trump colluded with Russia in the 2016 election. Luna says that amount is half the cost of the federal investigation into the alleged Trump-Russia collusion, debunked by not just Robert Mueller, but John Durham as well. And an attorney for the New York State Department of Health says the state is repealing its COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Thank God. Advocates for healthcare workers say 36,000 healthcare workers lost their jobs in 2021 because of that mandate. Now, you know what I'd like to know? If you're dropping the mandate, and I have a bias in this, I never took the jab, I never will take the jab. Tina made the same decision, and I didn't press her to do it, and she didn't press me to do it. I think it was the right call. I think those healthcare workers made the right call as well. And there are so many states around America where you have people who took the jab, and I think they are not the better off because of it. So you've got that as well. And then I have to tell you about this crazy Manhattan College professor who got so angry at anti-abortion students, she held a machete to the neck of a New York Post reporter yesterday, to his neck, making wild threats that she was going to chop him up. Apparently, it's not just babies that Democrat liberals and crazy college professors want to kill. Maybe they want to kill reporters as well. Are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000, and who couldn't? Employee retention tax credits, they're an incredible opportunity for you. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic. They've already helped out more than 1,500 small businesses. And the owners of those businesses got about $300 million in funding. And they know what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for those tax credits. And they're with you every step of the way, even in the event of an audit. They stand behind their work with an audit safeguard at Get My Funds. If you retain 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, and even if you already received the PPP, Paycheck Protection Plan money, you need to call Get My Funds and do it now at 800-535-2950. No, it's not a grant. It's not a loan. It's a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with the team you can trust at Get My Funds. 800-535-2950 or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. Glad to be with you on a Wednesday night. Always glad to take your calls. Coming up in a moment, the FTX crypto founder, the big scam that took so many people, Sam Bankman, arrested 6 months ago. He's been sitting in house arrest ever since. How long until we see real justice get served? We'll talk about that next on the Lars Larson Show. To the Lars Larson Show. It's a Wednesday night, and I want to talk about Sam Bankman-Fried, who, with everything else going on, seems to have disappeared from many of the pages of news organizations, whether it's online pages, television, radio, or whatever. And yet Sam Bankman was the guy behind the FTX cryptocurrency. I called it a scam. You can take me to court on that if you want to, but the fact is I think it was a scam. They pulled in people's money. They promised not to borrow it for other purposes. It was then borrowed for other purposes. Much of it was lost, and people got screwed. People got cheated. I think that's wrong. I think there ought to be some justice. So thought we'd check in with Christopher Alexander, who's CCO of Liberty Blockchain. Christopher, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Tell me this. Is this case ever going to come to trial, and is it really that complicated to prove that Sam Bankman-Fried was the head of an organization? They took money from people with written promises not to borrow it or move it around or use it for other things. They did. People lost money, and somebody needs to go to jail. Others have already pleaded guilty. What's the holdup?
I think the issue is, and this is what was happening when they brought in the guy who'd untangled Enron to deal with this, that it was just such a mind-boggling mess that untangling all of it to make sure that he's held accountable for everything that he did is slowing things down. There's just a staggering amount of documents. They used multiple, chats that they Gmail, and they crossed their personal emails with their work. I mean, the place was just extraordinarily poorly run. In fact, the only thing they really actually documented well was their efforts to what it looks like is cheating their customers. So it's just staggering to unravel all of it. Just think of all the video game notifications sitting in his Gmail next to things that may be malfeasance that investigators have to go through. It's just a huge, huge pile of stuff.
Christopher, is it possible that Bankman-Fried, as the guy who benefited tremendously, he got to be the toast of everywhere, got air kisses blown to him by members of Congress from the Democrat Party that he gave a lot of money to, could he skate out the door? Based on the fact that it's so complicated and convoluted, he could get away with saying, yeah, all that stuff happened, and I was the CEO, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't sign off on it.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think there's a few key pieces of evidence they found that are hard to walk back. But, when this first happened, and I was first talking with people about this, I pointed out, the incredible negligence and the actual criminal element of this are hard to untangle. Right. And I'm not making excuses for him, so we're clear, but you've got to work that out to make sure that he's held accountable for what he did wrong. And I mean, they recovered $7.3 billion of the $8 billion because that place was such a mess. And I mean, so he only took $700 million or lost it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Again, I'm not defending him, but it's just, wheels of justice grind slowly, and he deserves to pay for what he did, and it's going to take a while to sort it. But I can't see him completely skating out of it. There's too much they did to trade against their own customers through Alameda Research, at least allegedly, that there's no I had the wrong password, or I sent the wrong email out, or types of arguments for what they did to apparently trade against against customers on their own platform.
Okay, let me ask you about something else, because this confounds a lot of people. And I called a former prosecutor of mine, friend of mine, right after it happened, when they released him allegedly on $250 million bond. And I said, nobody put that up. And he said, no, his parents basically put up their house, which I think is worth $3 or $4 million. But why maintain the fiction that the guy is out on this massive $250 million bond when, in fact, nobody put up anything close to that? Or am I wrong about that?
It's a mystery to me as well. And then they were saying that people who helped put up some of the money, apparently, or in the first iteration, it's odd.
I wonder if we're losing your cell signal, Christopher. Are you near a window? Christopher, are you still there? We lost you for just a moment there. Have you come back?
Oh. Yeah, you got me. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I got you better. It's technology these days. But you were about to say some of the other people who were arrested in the case were implicated. What happened?
So no, as I was going to say, the Bankman-Frieds are, Stanford professors. They're prominent. They have connections to some very high-ranking Democrats, and perhaps there's a little bit of keeping quiet, who covered his bail, and a desire to kind of make this go away because of, how heavily he leaned Democrat in a kind of libertarian-leaning industry. He kind of stands out as being one of the rare Democrats, and hardly somebody they're real excited to claim right now. So I do wonder if there hasn't been a bit of influence to make sure that exactly how he was let out, it was kept from the public eye.
Okay, and do you expect his father and mother to be charged? And the reason I ask that is I recall reading early on that his father accompanied him on some of these trips to get investors in, and apparently because he's a tax law specialist at Stanford, he may have actually, participated in giving his son advice about how to set these things up. You think there's any possible charge there? Because I doubt they're going to testify against their own son. But on the other hand, if they participated in the crime, and I think they ended up with a bunch of houses in the Bahamas with their names on them, whether they knew it or not, you kind of wonder, well, do they end up with any kind of punishment for their involvement?
Yeah, it is. It boggles the mind a bit, the way these connections sort of spool out. And I would say this: I would presume, being Stanford law and professors and tax experts, his parents would have known how to make sure they couldn't get themselves in trouble. But not the first time people's hubris was an issue. So what I don't seem to see, at least any appetite for, is for prosecution against them. There hasn't been any mention of it. So I think either they're too hard to get, or they protected themselves and it's not an issue, I imagine.
Well, Mr. Alexander, it's always a pleasure. Thanks very much for coming on the program.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Glad to do it. If aging muscle and joints are slowing you down, use what I use. Lars here for Gem Pop Extra Strength CBD Cream from Generic CBD. Folks, this stuff is amazing. It's guaranteed to work or your money back. Rub it in. Rub it into your knees and your elbows and your shoulders and your back, and especially your hands. It melts right into your muscles and joints, and it goes to work fast. Plus, for me, it's a fantastic moisturizer. My wife and I love it. It's from our friends at Generic CBD, where you can save up to 75% on CBD. It's not yet sold in stores, but my listeners can get a trial-size bottle of 10 treatments for $9.95. That is a $20 value. It's not a subscription, and shipping is free. To order, go to rubitin.com. That's rubitin.com, or call 740-RUB-IT-IN. That's 740-RUB-IT-IN. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com and tell Alexa to play The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. When you support BLM, or the company you work for supports BLM, or the major companies that we buy so many things from, whether it's Nike or other companies, when they support Black Lives Matter, are they just actually supporting a scam? And are they continuing to support a scam? Although some of them seem to have been wising up, because there was a time when Black Lives Matter raised about $90 million in the year 2020. Because, of course, you had the George Floyd riots, you had all this other nonsense going on, and out comes Black Lives Matter, and a racist organization based on a lie. The lie was hands up, don't shoot. And that was, of course, the lie about what Michael Brown, a young man who assaulted a cop once and was trying to assault him again when the cop was forced to shoot him in self-defense, and Michael Brown died. And the story went that Michael Brown had been simply standing there minding his own business with his hands up saying, don't shoot, when in fact he was charging that cop. Well, let me tell you more about this scam and just how disgusting it is, because even though the amount of money that they've been raising this year and last year seems to be down dramatically from that big year of 2020, they're still raising a lot of money. And you know what? They're still paying the people at the top millions and millions of dollars. This is nothing more than a very public scam to scam money from major corporations who pay the money to assuage their guilt. Their guilt over race, their guilt over 1,000 different things. But first, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. And if you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. If you're a naysayer, I'll put you right to the head of the line. Because if you believe that Black Lives Matter is actually a legitimate operation, I'd be glad to hear the argument. But glad to have you with me. And thanks for joining me on the Radio Northwest Network, proudly serving the Pacific Northwest states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho for the past 23 and a half years. Now, about Black Lives Matter, the first time that I interacted with Black Lives Matter was in the summer of 2020. And you know what I did? I actually walked up to some of the people who were marching around with a bullhorn, with a sign. They were with Black Lives Matter. And I said, I'd like to talk to some of the people with your group. And in fact, I do a national radio show and a Northwest radio show. And what I'd like to do is get you on the radio so you can tell everybody what the cause is that you're pursuing. That was the year in which they managed to scam $90 million after the death of George Floyd. Of course, the incident I referred to, the hands up, don't shoot, that had happened in Ferguson, Missouri, considerably earlier, and it was called out fairly quickly as the lie that it was. Well, it turns out that last year, the tax documents are now in, and the Washington Free Beacon reported on them. Last year, 2022, they were actually bleeding cash all over the place, meaning they weren't making as much or taking in as much as they had. In fact, the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, according to the Beacon, ran a deficit of $8.5 million. They got so much money in 2020 and 2021, they actually had some of it stashed in investments. And the value of its investments dropped by about $10 million. And in fact, the group logged one loss on the sale of some stocks, some securities. They lost almost $1 million on one of them. And they sold it off at $172,000, meaning they lost 85% of the money. So some of the people and some of the businesses that funded Black Lives Matter, mostly to insure themselves. That is, there are companies that will make a big contribution to a popular political cause, or in this case, a racist cause, with the aim of trying to say, well, we're not bad people. We're not operating out of white privilege because we've given lots of money to BLM. But even though they were losing money, $8.5 million deficit last year, according to their tax filings, that did not stop them from, as the Washington Free Beacon puts it, doling out seven-figure contracts, not six. We're talking millions of dollars to the family and friends of its former executive director, Patrisse Cullors, who once said that the charity financial disclosures were triggering and deeply unsafe. In other words, they didn't want to have to tell the public how much money they were taking in and how much they were spending. Even though if you run a private nonprofit, you're required by the laws in the United States to say how much money you raised, where you raised the money from, and where you spent the money. Now, Black Lives Matter's latest Form 990 tax filing, shows the group is on a fast track to bankruptcy, financial insolvency, and that apparently what Patrisse Cullors had done before, and then was succeeded by Shalomaya Bowers, that they're just bleeding this thing down to nothing very, very quickly. BLM raised only $9.3 million in 2022. That was down 88% from the year before. People had figured out the scam. And BLM was forced to shut off its online fundraising streams in February of last year because of compliance and transparency. They were breaking the law in how they raised the money. The group has blown through 2/3 of the $90 million that it raised in that first year, the year of George Floyd. So in other words, they brought in a lot of money based on the death of a man who had no connection to the group whatsoever other than his skin color. And then they went out and they spent $12 million of the money on luxury homes in Los Angeles and Toronto, in Toronto, Canada. And it didn't slow down last year. The charity dropped another $10.5 million on contractors, and much of that went to companies, strange how it works out this way, that are linked to friends and family of Patrisse Cullors. Cullors' brother, according to the Washington Free Beacon, Paul Cullors, was a graffiti artist who had no prior experience as a bodyguard. And yet, he and his two companies raked in $1.6 million for providing professional security services for Black Lives Matter in 2022. Sounds like a no-show job to me. Paul Cullors was also one of BLM's only two paid employees during the year. He collected a salary of $126,000 a year as the head of security on top of his consulting fees. And then BLM disclosed about a year ago, in May of last year, it had paid Cullors $841,000 to protect one mansion, a $6 million mansion that Black Lives Matter bought in Los Angeles. Patrisse Cullors said she used it to film herself baking peach cobbler in the kitchen. And the charity told the Associated Press it could not entrust its security to the former police officers who typically staff those private protective security firms because, you can't trust the cops. Frankly, I don't think you can trust Black Lives Matter. I wish those companies would come out and declare we were cheated. We gave money for a cause. It didn't go to the cause. It went to fancy houses. It went to a lot of friends and family of Patrisse Cullors. But I have a feeling, given these days and the politics these days, they're not going to do that. Glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you and glad to take your calls in a moment. I want to talk about social media. I have as much concern as you do. I have a 7-year-old granddaughter, and I worry about social media and her. And her mother keeps an eye on her. Her father keeps an eye on her. Grandma and Grandpa keep an eye on her because we understand social media is full of a lot of garbage. And in fact, it even provides a window into your home and into your family for predators who might be going after kids. So the question comes up. Should the government ban social media for kids under 13? And could you effectively enforce that ban? And the alternative to that, which I would ordinarily favor, which is parents should make great choices for kids. I don't like the government stepping in instead of the parents, but that may be necessary in this case. It depends. Jessica Malusian joins me now with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Jessica, welcome back.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much for that. Tell me this, should there be government regulations that say if you're under 13, we don't want you on social media at all? And should that be the government? Because this is one, Jessica, where it kind of caused me to be torn over my philosophical belief that the best decisions for children are made by their parents and not by the government, because the government is trying to push a lot of other garbage on them, like saying you can change your gender, you can get an abortion, you can go on birth control pills, lots of things that are being pushed on young kids of that age because the government takes the view that, well, this isn't any of a parent's business. So I don't want to take that away from them. But is it going to be effective if we simply say, well, let's let parents decide whether their 13-year-old or younger should be on social media and let the parents monitor it? Because philosophically, I'm more in favor of letting American citizens and citizen parents make those decisions. But if that's not going to be effective, maybe we need to go the other route.
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right. Your instincts are correct. and it doesn't mean that there aren't concerns and this might not be a problem for some families, but it does mean that, we know that not every problem has a policy solution. And I
Right.
think that's really true of this, and for all the reasons you said. The same old boring wisdom applies here, right? Parents know their kids better. Every family has different shades of values, has different circumstances, and they're the ones that need to be in control of how much and at what age and what's off limits and what's not. And I think, part of what gets lost is social media is relatively new to a lot of us. So, I think sometimes parents feel like they're not empowered to make those decisions. So that's why I think it's a better path to direct parents and the learning curve to all these tools that these platforms provide for parents to control the amount of time and what kids see online. It's a little bit of a learning curve. It's true. And it's annoying because, the right answer is often the hard answer. Parents need to step up, take control of this as much as possible. As kids get older, that does get more difficult. But again, as kids get older, they're probably more able to deal with more of what we see online. And we don't want to keep kids completely off of this because as adults, they're going to have to live in a world where there is social media. And to not learn how to moderate and how to be savvy, it's a real missed opportunity, I think, if you just kind of go with this ban outright.
Yeah, and in fact, who is it then in Congress that is pushing this idea? Because it sounds like something the Democrats would not like in terms of banning you from social media, but it also sounds like something Republicans wouldn't either. So who is it that's pushing the idea of banning social media and letting the government take control of things instead of the parents?
Well, I have to say, I think this is sort of the worst instincts from both sides, right? There's some Democrats who like this because it's about government control, and there's some Republicans that like it because it's kind of a politically opportune way to beat up on big tech. So you see recently bills from like Senator Tom Cotton, who I think it's fair to say wouldn't want parents to be stripped of their decision making with their kids in a lot of other areas. But, I think the concern is genuine. I just think that this is a poor solution. It has a lot of unintended harmful consequences. When you talk about banning it by age, well, that means that everyone who's on social media has to verify that they are over 13, right? Or they're over 18.
And by the way, Jessica, let me throw in, when, say, I have a lot of social media connections online. Most of them are because of work. I don't really use it that much for fun, but I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and Truth Social and all the rest of that. But when you do that, when you have to confirm how old you are, what's the best way to do that? Give up your name, your date of birth, your maybe picture ID, things like that. And all of a sudden, to get the ban for 13-year-olds, you have to gather all this data from adults that many of us don't want to have social media tech companies gathering. So how do we get around that?
Exactly right. Well, you really can't. I mean, there's some biometric data solutions, but I don't think that having your retina scan seems that much better to me.
Not any better. How about fingerprints? How about give up your firstborn? All of them are bad solutions, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And the ability to speak anonymously is something that's sort of been enshrined in the structure of our country. It's a really important part of the First Amendment. And you're going to take that away if you're having people upload their government IDs in order to be on, Instagram or Twitter. It's kind of ridiculous, but it is what has to happen when you start putting in these age bans. So not only are you stripping parents of their authority to manage their kids' time online as they see fit, but you're also stripping the entire population of their right to speak anonymously online. So, this seems to be something that's going to cause just as many problems as it's trying to solve.
Yeah.
And I think really the answer here is there's so many resources for parents to be more savvy and more in control of what their kids are doing online. I think that that's an important educational opportunity parents don't take enough advantage of.
You know what I'd like to see, Jessica? I think this is the ideal solution, and you tell me what you think. I think the industry should control itself. And I'll give you an example. I work in radio. I started 48 years ago. Do you know how many commercials are on in every hour on the air? 14 minutes. Do you know how many are on today? 14 minutes. And people say, well, that's because the government regulates it. And I said, no, the industry didn't want the government to regulate it. So they said, why don't we just voluntarily say, we're going to limit commercial matter to 14 minutes an hour. It's great. Less than 25% of every hour of radio is commercials. Now, newspapers were 25% content and 75% ads. So radio beat newspapers all day long back in the newspaper days. But the industry regulated itself and policed itself. And so is there any sign the social media companies would say, we understand we want lots and lots of eyeballs on our social media because that's advertising, and that means the cash flow that runs those companies. But, kids 13 and under don't have any money to speak of, and for the most part can't buy they're not buying pickup trucks or life insurance or houses and mortgages. So, and there are products sold to kids. Why is there any sign the industry is capable of getting together and saying, why don't we police ourselves so the government doesn't do it?
Yeah, I think we're seeing some encouraging signs there. They have every incentive to want to allow kids in a responsible way to be on their platforms. And TikTok a couple months ago has limited, I think it's a 60-minute screen time for anyone under 18. They've done that. No one mandated that. They just did that because they want parents to continue to allow their kids to be on their platform. And Facebook and YouTube, all of these companies have whole websites devoted to all these tools you can turn on as a parent. So I think that is there, but you hear so much less about that, right? That doesn't really.
Jessica, thank you very much. That's Jessica Malusian from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. If aging muscle and joints are slowing you down, use what I use. Lars here for Gen Pop Extra Strength CBD Cream from Generic CBD. Folks, this stuff's amazing. It's guaranteed to work or your money back. Rub it into your knees, elbows, your shoulder and back, and especially your hands. It melts right into your muscles and joints, and it goes to work fast. Plus, for me, it's a great moisturizer. My wife and I love it. And it's from our friends at Generic CBD, where you can save up to 75% on CBD. It's not yet sold in stores, but my listeners can get a trial-size bottle of 10 treatments for just $9.95. That's a $20 value. It's not a subscription, and shipping is free. To order, go to rubitin.com. That's rubitin.com or call 740-RUB-IT-IN. That's 740-RUB-IT-IN. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. Back in a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. If you're like me, I imagine that you are probably more than a little bit disappointed by the John Durham report because we went through years as the special counsel investigated the Russiagate conspiracy and collusion of so many people on the left side of the aisle. And at the end of it, we got a big report. It seemed to be an indictment of both the media and the deep state, but it didn't really suggest anybody be prosecuted for it at all. So I thought to bring myself back down to earth, I'd call on my friend Ben Weingarten, who's an editor at Real Clear Investigations. Ben, welcome back.
Lars, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Should I be as disappointed as I feel? Because all of us kept waiting for John Durham he's going to come back and he's going to say, people at the FBI, people in the government, people in the deep state, maybe even including Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and a whole host of other characters conspired to change the outcome of an American election and steal the ability to make that decision from voters and take it over themselves like you would in some third world banana republic. And I thought, and nothing came out of it, except you see some things in there that maybe I don't.
Well, look, I think to the extent you were expecting justice, you should be disappointed. That said, the entirety of the pendency of the Durham investigation, I urged in my writing that we ought to look at it very skeptically and always question whether or not Durham was an investigator of the investigators or the ultimate company man who would give the appearance of trying to give us at minimum transparency, but in reality not go all the way. And I think there's a major disconnect within the report itself, which is that Durham, to quote him, says that the DOJ and FBI, quote, failed to uphold their mission of strict fidelity to the law with respect to the bevy of outrages that he details in a mass of gory information and damning quotes from line agents and other experts who essentially say that this was a hoax from the start, that the DOJ and FBI and others broke laws, rules, and norms to recklessly pursue Trump-Russia collusion when there was never any there from the start. They totally ignored exculpatory evidence almost the entire way. There was a blatant double standard in the treatment of Trump versus Hillary Clinton. And yet, to your point, and this is where I think the dissatisfaction is more than merited and justified, he doesn't call for radical changes within the FBI and DOJ. And as you allude to, we have to look at, the results of the probe, 3 false statements cases, only one of which proved successful, and a handful of referrals. And that's it when you're talking about arguably the conspiracy of the century, if not a once-in-a-nation kind of conspiracy. And so I think the biggest deficiencies in this report, I'll tick through them very quickly, are one, he raises the idea that the FBI was manipulated in the report. That is utterly inconceivable given the massive evidence that he lays out about how the FBI and DOJ covered their eyes and ears to what was right in front of them through the entirety of the so-called Trump-Russia collusion investigation. As well, Durham never subpoenaed, to our knowledge, some of the most critical players in the entire scandal, namely James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Christopher Steele, Fusion GPS's Glenn Simpson, and last but not least, and this isn't a totally inclusive list here, Barack Obama, who was the commander-in-chief when all the wheels were put into motion here. Durham also never investigated the DNC hack, apparently, or what the heck the Mueller special counsel was doing when it was readily apparent to the Durham special counsel that this was a fraud from the start. And so you look at that and you say, how could you not call for a mass of changes within DOJ and FBI, and how could you not call for a whole slew of prosecutions? And essentially what Durham says is, reading between the lines, I wouldn't be able to win these cases. That may be true when you're talking about litigating in front of a Washington, D.C. or Virginia, essentially deep state sympathetic jury and judge. But then the idea that somehow, and these are his words, he talks about that the FBI needs to return to the rules of old. How are you going to entice people to do that? How are you going to persuade them to do that when no one has paid a price for this massive scandal that Durham laid out? And that, I think, is why the Durham report, intentionally or not, and we have to assume it's unintentional, is a self-indicting report because it points the finger back at Durham of how can you lay out this massive, arguably criminal conspiracy of the nth degree and then not hold anyone accountable or call for radical and revolutionary change. And so it falls upon Congress ultimately then to hold these institutions to account to the extent they can be held to account.
And by the way, most of the Congress, and I say this about Republicans, are feckless. They're like, oh, listen, we don't want to wade into that. It has too many political implications for us. But Ben, this, I guess I can't wrap my head around why, if somebody were young in their career, they might say, well, I want to do something, kind of go along, get along, and I'll be the company man. This guy's at the, I would argue, toward the end of his career. You'd think he wouldn't want to be remembered, if that was his concern, his legacy, as the guy who basically said, yeah, all this stuff is happening, and I'm not suggesting the changes that'll stop it from happening again. So we're almost doomed to see it repeat at some point. And you're the guy who gave everybody essentially the document that says, yep, we should just leave the FBI as it is and ask them pretty please to start following the rules, which ain't going to happen. I mean, why would he do that?
Yeah, it's utterly damning. And I think that if you were to look at it from the perspective of who were the other prosecutors working with him, perhaps they have long careers ahead of them. But I think what this ultimately shows is this is the power of the institutions. Any one man who would dare to come across those institutions would get crushed. This shows that even someone, as you know, at the end of their career who essentially has nothing to lose here and could arguably create an amazing legacy for himself with millions of Americans who feel that these institutions, I think rightly so, have been weaponized against them, with Trump as a proxy starting in 2016 but continuing to this day. I totally agree. It shows you that is how strong the power and the hold of these bureaucracies is. By the way, we can see it with how they've all circled the wagons around the FBI leadership and such when it comes to these whistleblowers who appeared before the House Weaponization Subcommittee.
Who are getting crushed, Ben. I mean, these are relatively young men who have careers ahead of them, and they've sacrificed all that, their blood, their treasure, their sacred honor, to stand up and do the right thing. And you've got tens of thousands of FBI agents and a half dozen who've decided to do the right thing, and the rest of them are just keeping their heads down, hoping to keep their pension, I guess.
Absolutely right. And one of the most damning and telling lines that I saw during that hearing was one of the agents, Garrett O'Boyle, when asked if he would recommend to others within the Bureau that they serve as whistleblowers, he said, honestly, I would not, because my life was wrecked as a consequence of this process. And I think that tells you all you need to know about the state of these institutions, where we can least afford to have them hyper-politicized and weaponized because of the awesome power and authority that they have.
Unbelievable. Well, I'm glad you're writing about it. And Ben, I would hope that all of us would say, if I'm near the end of my career and I got one last chance to do something right, even if it costs me a job or whatever, that we do what the young men from the whistleblowers, who most of them, you'll note, served in the military, would say, I'm going to stand up and do the right thing, and damn the consequences. It's the right thing for America, and shame on everybody else in those agencies for not doing the right thing as well. Ben Weingarten is one of the editors at Real Clear Investigations. We always appreciate his insight. I'll get to your phone calls and emails in just a moment at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com, and you're listening to the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'll get back to your phone calls and emails shortly at 866-HEY-LARS. You know, there's a new hate crime law going into effect. Now, it's happening in Ireland and not here in the United States, but unfortunately, a lot of things happen in Europe. And then the knuckleheads, the liberals in America, love to say, but Europe is doing it. Let me bring this to your attention, because I think this is one of those examples where you say, well, how bad can these hate crime laws get? And when they get bad enough, how many rights do we end up losing because certain kinds of speech have been declared as hate crimes? Well, I'll refer to some great reporting by a guy you've heard on the show before, S.A. McCarthy, who writes at Real Clear Investigations. He's not on with me today, but he did this report from Limerick, Ireland, and there's a passing of the most aggressive hate crime law yet in the European Union, including the EU's first legal protections for transgender individuals, which is an issue that, of course, the United States is dealing with right now as well. And the critics say that the bill has really vague language. Now, you might think that's a good thing. It's not a good thing. Anytime you start describing speech in vague terms, it means that is that's an opportunity for people who want to use it for political reasons, who want to go out and silence people that they disagree with. They will take that to the bank every single day. And the critics say the vague language could be used to enforce the increasingly progressive Irish government's agenda, a woke agenda, and then muzzle critics of unpopular policies. And it kind of opens up a little bit of a window, as S.A. points out, into how quickly Ireland, which only legalized abortion about 5 years ago, is moving from its really traditional family-based Roman Catholic traditions to others. The legislation shows that there is a rift between Ireland's leaders and its people. And I've talked about this before because it always seemed like a bit of a mystery to me that I would say to my friends, say, who are pro-death penalty. I'm pro-death penalty. And I say, well, but most of the European countries don't have the death penalty. Do the people not support it there? And if you take a look at the public opinion polls, you'll find out 55 or 60% of the people in Western Europe support, let's say, the death penalty, which is a conservative position generally. And you say, well, if the people support it, why is it that the leadership of the country has made it off limits? And the short answer is because the leadership has decided that the masses are asses, and therefore they don't have to listen to the people. And that's beginning to happen in America as well. You might notice that there are a great number of states where state lawmakers will go in and pass a law. They'll say, let's have a law that gives illegal aliens driver's licenses. And you say, but the people of your state don't support that. They say, we don't care what the people think. We're going to do it anyway. It's the right thing to do. In other words, we're going from representative government, where the government, your state lawmakers, your governor, mayors of cities, city councils, school boards, are supposed to represent you, the citizens, and that ultimately the right to govern is given with the consent of the governed. Now, that's not the kind of system that's been in place in Europe for a long, long time. Europe had kings and queens. Great Britain still does. And their view is, well, we have divine right to govern. We don't have to have your permission. In America, the founders of this great country said, your rights come from God and not from the government. John Kennedy had a great quote like that in his first inaugural, in which he talked about the radical notion that the rights of men and women come from God and not from the government. You ask your favorite, even your favorite Republican representative, tell them what that quote is, but don't tell them where it came from. And say, do you think that the rights of the citizens come from God or from the government? Now, if you're a real conservative, you'll say your rights come from God, not from the government. And where else could they come from? Because if they don't come from God and they don't come from government, where would you get your rights? And this bill, what they've done in Ireland right now, it treats not just public presentation or dissemination of material. So let's say you go out and have a political rally, or you give a speech like the speech that Donald Trump gave on January 6th, where there's been every effort to try and silence him, that if somebody decides that what you said is hateful, then it can actually be made illegal. They don't have a First Amendment in most of Western Europe. They certainly don't have one in the United Kingdom. It also says that even private preparation or storing of material that is deemed to be hateful, like a meme on your phone or a book that you have on the shelf in your house, that if they decide, this is how broad it is, if they decide that you are hanging on to a book that they disagree with, that the book itself can be illegal and that your possession of the book can be a crime. And one of the legal scholars who's quoted in this piece says the bill's definition of hate absolutely fails because there is no coherent attempt to define a term like X that can include X in the proposed definition. I mean, if you define the word desk and say, well, a desk is a desk made of wood or metal. And you say, well, if you define a word with itself, then what does that actually mean? It means nothing at all. And let me give you one example of how radical they have become in Western Europe. Last year, a school teacher was thrown into solitary confinement at a Dublin prison. It's known as Mountjoy, because the teacher refused to call a student by the they-them pronoun. And he cited his Christian faith. And they said, you're not allowed to have those beliefs. You're not allowed to act on those beliefs. Therefore, you go to prison. And as one of the critics of this bill said, George Orwell's 1984 was not an instruction manual. I'm worried that we're getting to that point in this country because we have college professors, one of them in New York City recently, who put a machete to a man's neck and did it on camera. So thank God we've got proof of what happened. That professor has now been fired from her job. It was a woman. It was a person of color who came out, and because she disagreed with a man who was talking about abortion, she put a machete to his neck. Now, is she going to go to prison for that, for threatening somebody's life, putting a knife to somebody's neck where a simple cut could end up slicing your jugular and leave you bleeding and dead on the ground? Doesn't sound like it. In fact, I'm willing to bet that if the college thought they could get away with keeping that professor around, they probably would do it. But this is where we're headed unless we push back hard. And what I mean by that is tell your conservative friends, your Republican friends, don't adopt the language of the woke. If they say, well, you're not allowed to use the term, you're not allowed to use certain terminology. You're not allowed to speak. No. That's not what the First Amendment says. It says the government isn't allowed to go after your speech. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show.